Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me today for Feed My Sheep. I am coming to you from the great state of Kansas, and with me I have my guest all the way from Scotland, Andrew Mathieson from Lockheed Baptist Church in Dundee, Scotland. So thank you for joining us today, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you and talk with everybody who's listening in. So looking forward to it.
Andrew is part of a ministry called 20 Schemes, and Andrew, I want you to just tell us a little bit about what 20 Schemes is and how you fit into that ministry.
20 Schemes, let's clear up the use of the word scheme first, is not a nefarious term. A scheme is what we call a housing project here. They're not a one-to-one sort of parallel of the housing projects. I think Mez, when he explains it to American audiences, explains the schemes as being something akin to, a trailer park mixed with a project, mixed with something like a Native American reservation. You see a lot of those aspects all mixed together. They range in size from 2,000 through to 30,000, 40,000 people. We're in Lockheed. Lockheed is about 20,000 people. We moved here to plant a church in 7 years ago now. 6 years ago, we moved here just before my daughter was born. My eldest daughter. The schemes of Scotland in general actually has become, sadly, a long way from being the land of the book as it was once known. Spiritually has declined. It's somewhere around 2.5% evangelical now. That number doesn't mean much to you, but if you want to know why that statistic is important, you will be classed as an unreached nation if you fall below 2% evangelical. And so Scotland, the land of the book, is right on the cusp of being considered an unreached people group. That is particularly true of its poorest communities, which is where we are. And so 20 schemes exist. Smith McCall come up with the idea to plant churches in Scotland's poorest communities, gospel churches in poorest communities. 20 churches in 10 years is the goal.
So at this point, there may be a lot of people watching who say, I really don't know Scotland's history in terms of its influence in Christianity or its history with the kingdom of God. You've mentioned a couple times that it is called the land of the book. Why was it called that? What is the significance of Christian history with Scotland?
We have the joke in Scotland about the difference between the Scottish and the English Reformation. In Scotland, we had a Reformation, and in England, they made the King Pope. Is the way the story goes. Knox fled from persecution in Scotland. I mean, there was already the Reformation kicking off here, but Knox particularly fled persecution and flees to Geneva and trains under Calvin and comes back a powerhouse spiritually. And, Mary Queen of Scots, who was his opponent at the time, a Catholic monarch, said famously, I fear the prayers of John Knox more than 1,000 archers. And so he and his friends evangelized Scotland. And really, by the end of that kind of Reformation period, Scotland was a truly Christianized nation. It then became why it becomes known as the land of the book. It becomes a sending force through the kind of missionary era of the 17 and 1800s into the 1900s. Sending out people all over the world, Livingston, etc., right up to Liddell into the 20th century. So it's just a sending nation that evangelizes huge chunks of the world. I mean, your own nation is and very much part of, the Scottish tradition is there. As they say, you take the kind of the Dutch Reformed, Scottish Presbyterians, the English Puritans, and the French Huguenots are those who really flee persecution in Europe and become the original pilgrims. They go and settle there, so we are very much part of that motion as well. And obviously the strength of the Presbyterian Church in the States has been seen as being, Scotland invented Presbyterianism. says the Baptist, who is still trying to convince them they got a few things wrong. But yeah, no, we had a huge reach globally, particularly missionally. And so the irony, of course, of Scotland, this place that is known by Christendom, if you go to Africa, African Christendom knows Scotland as the evangelizing force of Africa. To now consider Scotland as a non-Christian nation, as an unreached people, is a terrible state of affairs to be in.
So where you are particularly in ministry is to one of the schemes in Dundee in Lochie Baptist. I'm curious. You said you've been there 7 years. How are things going with your church right now?
So we're doing okay. We've been on the ground nearly 7 years. So my wife and I moved in, and there had been a church here, but it shut its doors in 2000. It had been dying for a time before that. Basically, its last pastor died the year I was born, so 1983, and then it was run by his sons and by committee, and it just slowly disconnected from the people around, became more and more insular, and over time died and was eventually absorbed by a large city centre church in Dundee, what was left of it, and they absorbed the property and everything that went along with it, called Central Baptist Church. So Mays McConnell comes up with the idea for 20 schemes, having read in the newspaper about Scotland's 50 poorest council wards. And he then sent some of his interns out to research how many of these poorest communities in Scotland had gospel churches. And the answer was, I think out of the 50, like one or two. Like it was very, very few. And that pattern is repeated throughout, the hundreds and hundreds of schemes that make up Scotland's cities. Anyway, this kind of pattern of unchurched schemes was spotted, and Mays comes up with the idea of 20 schemes. He had thought of 50 schemes in 10 years, but Mark Ever and some of his friends talked him off the ledge and said 20 is probably a more realistic number. So
That's a lot of church plants. It's difficult to plant a church. So one in 10 years is difficult.
Yeah. So that became that. So 20 schemes comes up, exists. Mays then meets a guy called Jim Tarrant, who is the pastor of CBC, Central Baptist Church, who is the city centre church I spoke of in Dundee, who had absorbed what was left of the old Lochie Baptist Church and including its properties. And they kind of struck up a friendship, and out of that came the sort of desire to plant or replant in the community that we're in. And so we were called eventually by Central to plant out of there. One of the really important things, and you'll hear that, is that 20 Schemes is not a parachurch organisation. It itself is a ministry of Niddrie Community Church in Edinburgh. 20 Schemes exists to resource church planting, and train church planters and church interns, etc., and church workers. But churches plant churches. Right. Central Baptist Church planted Lochie Baptist Chapel. The other 20 Schemes church plants are plants of various churches around Scotland. And so 20 Schemes is a resourcing ministry and a training ministry, rather than a sort of unattached parachurch. So yeah, we came in here to Lochie about 6 years ago, got on the ground, and as I said, there'd been no gospel ministry here for 20 years, so it was a strange thing. Lauren and I were sitting in this room in the back of our church building. It's now the office, but it was a purple room. The paint was lilac, and we began to pray just that God would grant us favour in the community and grant us grace to preach the gospel. And more than that, we began to pray for people to come along and get involved. So we did that and spent 6 months getting to know the community, doing the work of just being there, researching, began to put together a plan and an idea of how we were going to go about planting, and then I kind of put up on Sunday nights. We did a sort of, if anyone's interested, evenings where we kind of shared the vision for Lochie Baptist Chapel and began to train and teach those who were interested in what we consider our core values there. We use 4 words: gospel, discipleship, mission together. Catchphrase you'll see on our website or on any kind of flyers or anything you ever see. And it's just saying that this is what we believe is central to this church and that church's mission. The gospel is the foundation of everything. The message of Christ died for sinners and was raised to life that we might live. That is the foundation. Everything we do flows from there. That gospel message creates a people. That's the together. It creates the church. So there we train people in our ecclesiology and all of the ins and outs of what we believe about eldership and etc. All that stuff. And then the other 2 flow out from those 2. So what is discipleship? Well, we would say that discipleship is the church applies the gospel to itself, and mission is the church takes the gospel to the community, and obviously further afield as well to the world. So that was really what we trained people in, and through that we eventually, over like the next 9-month period, gathered a group of people together who were interested. There was about 16 of us at first when we covenanted to become LBC. That was about 3.5 years ago now that we went from being an idea to being a church. Over the next few years, we've seen people come and go. So of those who were here originally, I think there's only about 10 of us left. There's now 22 members. We've seen people come from various places, people move on. But the Lord's been saving people in the community as well. And so we're very encouraged by that. It's been an up and down time. It's one of those things that you go from church planting to being a church. And then comes all of the realities of church ministry and church life, both the good and the not so good. There's been hard times in there as well. Sin is horrible to watch and is deadly, and that's always a tragic reality of pastoring that we've had to deal with in that as we went along, as well as the joyous side of seeing people come to Christ, be baptized and join to us, and more than that, growing in grace and love of Jesus. So it's been a crazy time, just watching the Lord work and being involved, but it's been a blessing to be involved. I don't know if that kind of answers the Dwight Stevens question, or if I ended up rambling a little bit, but
No, it certainly answers. As somebody who's planted a church, I'm aware of the challenges that you're mentioning, and I am incredibly thankful, and I think I speak for all of those who are watching, that we are very thankful that you are taking the gospel to a place that we might never see, we won't ever go to carry the gospel, and at least in a long-term manner. And I just want to encourage you that the Lord is blessing you, and you're doing so much in terms of faithfulness, and the Lord brings the fruitfulness. We just are called to continue to push the plow, and the Lord produces the crops. So you're doing great in the Lord, and I'm so blessed and encouraged by you. One of the things that I really appreciate about you is the way in which you approach the scriptures. You are very faithful to preach the word, and you preach really well. I've heard you a few times, and I've just been very encouraged by your skills and abilities to present the word of God in a way that is both really deep and also very accessible to people. And I think that's a gift not everyone has, to have both deep and wide in your preaching. And I want to ask you some questions about something you've been preaching through lately, which is Ephesians chapter 5.
mm-hmm.
In Ephesians chapter 5, towards the end of the chapter, of course, we hear this relationship conversation about husbands and wives. And Paul is speaking to husbands and wives and telling them how they are to relate to one another. But primarily, that text gives us information about a mysterious relationship between Christ and the church. Would you be willing to share with us what is the connection there between husbands and wives and Christ and the church?
Yeah. Okay. So the relationship between Christ and the church, um, and husbands and wives, is seen primarily in the roles that the two adopt. Um, we see this fabulous and powerful. I'm going to start with husbands first, although Paul in Ephesians starts the other way around with wives. But I'm going to start with husbands in our discussion. You have this incredible challenge that Paul lays out to husbands in verse 25 of chapter 5. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own body. Anyway, right. Husbands are to love their wives as Christ loves the church. So we are to take a role of a type of Christ. So the question becomes then, how does Christ love the church? Well, the first thing we see here in the text is that Christ loves the church sacrificially. You know, he laid himself down for her. He gave himself for her. He died for her. How is a husband to mirror that in our marriages? Well, we are to die to self, firstly. And we are to put to death the um, when I was preaching this, say you get yourself to the back of the queue. You know, your priority list has to change. It is Christ first. Your wife, your children, your church family, the world, and then you're back of the bus. Right? That is where we have to learn to put ourselves. And that's what Christ does for us. He put himself, though he deserves, though he is the head, right? And though the husband is the head, right? He put himself at the back of the bus. He came not to be served, but to serve, and gave himself. And so that is the first thing. So we are to call to live sacrificial lives, to live for others, to die to self. Secondly, we see that he loved purposefully. Right? Christ loved the church purposefully. He had a mission to cleanse her, to wash her, to sanctify her. Now, that is not my mission as a husband. That is Christ's work in my wife. But I have to be a tool by which that is accomplished. I have to love my wife purposefully, which means there are things I must do beyond simply sacrificing and grinding and working and putting myself at the back of the line. It means I must take the role within my family of teacher as well. You know, I will teach the scriptures to my wife. I will apply the scriptures to my children. You know, I will lead in family worship and disciplining our children and taking, you know, the responsibility to see growth there. My wife's spiritual health is my concern. My children's spiritual health is my concern. Theirs, obviously, they will look to me. My wife will look after me, of course, but it's not her job to be concerned with my spiritual health. She will be if it's not in good nick, but it is actually my job here, the text says, to be concerned, to be in the business of purposefully living. Another thing we do see here in this text, again, that the way Christ loves is selflessly. And these are just a few things we see here. Again, this is very similar to the sacrificially. These are verses 28 to 29. You see these verses in the same way husbands should love their wives as they love their own body. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it just as Christ does the church. So what we're seeing here is we provide, not neglect. So we are active. We have to remember, as men, we are going to sin usually in one of two ways. Adam's great tricks are to shirk responsibility, neglect responsibility, and just have the slopey shoulder and duck it. Or we will do the opposite, which is we will throw our weight around. And we have to do neither of those. We are to be purposeful. We are to be selfless in providing for our families. We are to nurture, not abuse. We see that here as well in the nourishing passage. So we are caring for, providing for physically, emotionally, spiritually our wives. And then the next one, we appreciate our wives. We are grateful for them and all that they do, not taking them for granted, right? It is the thing here. We don't take our own well-being for granted, and we take our own bodies for granted, Paul says here, and neither should we do. So the husband is called to love as Christ loves, and this is the things he did, right? He loved us actively in these ways, sacrificially, purposely, selflessly, even though he was the head, even though he is the Lord, as Peter calls us to be in our houses, right? And says, say I called Abraham Lord, that kind of statement. He's still, he is a Lord who serves, and that is what we are to be in our houses. The other side of this is wives, and they are to love their husbands and submit to their husbands as to the Lord, right? It is to be done. Firstly, I think we have to see, if we jump back, your Bible's going to have this little heading that says wives and husbands just between 21 and 22. It's not the most helpful little split, because it separates the passage above. And actually it says submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. So out of reverence for Christ, submit to your husband, right? Is what you're called to do, wives. So it's not about your husband firstly, it's about Jesus, right? You're called to submit to your husband as a picture of your submission to Christ. You do that, we call it, so these two things here, reverence, reverential submission would be the way we put it forward. What is that? What is it to do that? Well, first things we would say is, or what I said when I was teaching this, is that reverential submission is rooted in biblical authority. So firstly, understand this is not my idea, it's not your husband's idea, it's not the church's idea, it's God's idea. It comes from his word, it's the calling of his word. So it is rooted in biblical authority. And as with all biblical authority, we are all called to obey when we see that. It's not an optional kind of, well, if you feel like it. No, we are called to submit to the Lord and to his word. And so here wives are called to submit to their husbands out of reverential fear for Christ. What is it to submit? What is reverential submission? Well, we said this, it said it is an honor. It is to honor your husband, right? And to love him. And this is what we said here. It is the giving of yourself for your husband's welfare, right? The giving of yourself for your mutual relationship, and the giving of yourself for Christ's sake, right? That is what it is to love. And then to submit, we see here the model of Christ in the church is set down. This is how we submit to Jesus, is how he used to do it. The reasons for it are laid out here. Well, the reasons for it are laid out in various other passages. So I said, 1 Corinthians 11, 3-9, Genesis 2:18, man is first, woman is made out of man. You have that controversial passages, we would call them, in 1 Timothy 2, sin entered the world through women. Is one of the reasons, again, that we are called to headship. You have these titles that are given to man that are odd. Why? I'm just giving you some of the reasons why. People look for an answer. Why should I? What is your biblical evidence for this? And I'm saying, well, here's your kind of evidence. You have the model as it's laid out here. We're to take the church role. Wives are to take the church's role in the relationship. Husbands are to take the Christ role in the relationship. So the church is submissive to Christ. Christ is the Lord. You have these passages. Woman was made out of man. That's Genesis 2 and 1 Corinthians 11, 3-9. You have this sin entering the world through women in 1 Timothy 2. And then you have the titles that man is given in the scripture. You have head, you have guide, you even have, as we mentioned earlier in 1 Peter, Lord given. And now these are strange titles, but for a follower, right? These are strange words for someone who's to follow. So there's a clue in the name, would be the idea. How does submission function becomes the next question. What does it look like? Well, here's what we said. It said it responds to your husband's authority while retaining your value and dignity. It obeys your husband Wives are called to obey their husband, not all men, everywhere. You know, it's not a kind of a putting of women under men in general, no, it's putting of wives under your own husband. It places the Lord above your husband. That's what we see here. Out of reverence for Christ, submit to your husband. So the head is Christ. What does it look like? Well, it is complete, it is heartfelt, it is voluntary, it is loving, it is tender, and it is wise. Those are what we are calling for. And finally, when it functions properly, it should avoid both feminism and chauvinism. Right? It should avoid the elevation of either gender above each other and above each other in value or dignity or worth. It should recognise God's good design for family, and ultimately it should present the gospel to the community. When we live this way, when we have husbands loving as Christ loves and wives loving as the church loves, what we do is we paint a picture of the gospel that is presented to all who know us. You'll hear Mark Dever use the phrase sometimes, the church is the gospel made visible, which is absolutely correct. That is also true of the marriage, is the gospel made visible. In fact, it is the normal way for most of us to display gospel patterns in life. It's just, those are the places where people are going to see us and see the gospel. And what I mean by see the gospel is this. The gospel makes big claims about salvation and transformation. And actually, people will or should be able to see its power in the lives of those who claim its grace. Right? And so that means, like, if I am truly converted, if my wife is truly converted, when I preach the gospel to someone, they should be able to see in my marriage something that confirms the truthfulness of the message I proclaim. And that is the purpose that is being put here. Because remember, that's what's always going on in the second half of Ephesians, right? All of it is going on. As Paul is saying, right, I've given you the glories of the gospel in the first 3 chapters, how you've been elected and how you've been adopted and how you've been saved by grace, etc., etc. All those wonderful doctrines that are just thrown there in the first 3 chapters. And then from chapter 4, Paul says, okay, in light of this, walk like this. And he talks about how this should be in the church, and then goes through the various ways that this works out. And then at this point, he's saying, here's how Christian families work. That's why it goes, husbands and wives, then to children, and then this is what it looks like in your work life. Right? He's just playing it out. But he's saying all along, there's these huge gospel claims we're going to make as people, and they have to be visible, or people will go, this is nonsense. And that's the point, that our marriages are one of the primary ways we display the truthfulness of the gospel, which of course puts a huge onus on us and our marriages as believers, because we are presenting or failing to present. We're either telling the truth about the gospel or we're lying about the gospel by our actions.